Great. Are we ready to get started, staff? Carol?
I don't think we have enough trustees. I just have you and Mr. Santos, and Mr. Keogh is not going to be here today. Ms. Santos, is she on? I don't see her.
Ms. Sanchez has just joined.
Oh, good. And Ms. Greenwood, and I guess we can begin. You're a quorum.
So we're going to get started. If we don't have a quorum, we'll hold off on the minutes until we do have a quorum, but I see a quorum. So
Yes.
We do have a quorum.
Carol, would you make the usual announcement and take the roll call?
Yes. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting, so I'll do a roll call of all the trustees to confirm attendance. Ms. Sanchez?
I made it.
Mr. Santos?
I'm stuck in traffic.
Ms. Greenwood? Mr. Bernstein?
I am here.
Mr. Knox, I know he's out. Mr. Green? Mr. Jones? Mr. Kelly?
Prevail is here.
Trustees, if you have a comment or question, please use the Zoom chat option. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you're ready to speak. And now, Chair Bernstein, we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you, Carol. We are on to item 2, approval of the minutes of the regular committee meeting of February 10th.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Sanchez, seconded by Santos. I have a good feeling about this one. Carol, can we take a roll call?
Yes. Ms. Sanchez?
Yes.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Bernstein?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're on to public comment. Carol, do we have any slips from the public?
No, we do not.
Thank you. We have a consent item regarding Brown Act suspension under COVID emergencies. I'll move it. Would anyone like to second it?
Second.
Can we get a roll call, Carol?
Yes. Ms. Sanchez?
Yes.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Bernstein?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We are on to item 5, a non-consent item. This is a recommendation submitted by our CIO, John Grable, that the committee advance to the Board of Investments for approval LACERA's nomination of Scott Drazel for re-election to the CII 2022 annual board election.
Approval.
I'll second it. Any discussion? Carol, can we get a roll call?
Yes. Ms. Sanchez?
Yep.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Chair Bernstein?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Congratulations, Scott. Good luck with that election. We are on to item 6, reports. First, we have a review of fiscal year 2021 proxy voting results and trends. And I will turn it over to Scott Drazel and Dale Johnson.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everybody. Thank you, Kwok, as well, for guiding our slides today. Report 6A presents statistics and trend lines on LACERA's proxy voting for the past fiscal year for the committee's review. I'll turn it over to Dale to walk through the report with you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee, and trustees. This presentation provides a review of LACERA's proxy voting results and trends for the fiscal year of July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2021. Starting on slide 2, LACERA has expanded its proxy voting authority over the past several years, first through the conversion of a U.S. index fund from commingled account to separate account, and then nearly 2 years ago with the assignment of our MSCI ACWI IMI index portfolio into a separate account managed by State Street Global Advisors, where we now retain full voting authority. The increase in LACERA's voting authority from less than 20% of the global equity portfolio 33 years ago to approximately 90% of the global equities portfolio in the past 2 years is illustrated by the pie charts at the bottom of the slide. While the coverage of overall AUM has been consistent over the past 2 years, you'll note that the number of meetings voted this year increased due to the voting of the portfolio over the entire fiscal year. Whereas in fiscal year 2020, the non-US portion of the MSCI ACWI IMI Index Fund was in transition in the first half of the fiscal year. Moving on to slide 5, we present some high-level statistics of the distribution of the meetings voted across 65 markets, summarized by region across the globe on the top right map and by month on the bottom table. The US represents the vast majority of our votes. Note that just under 2/3 of our meetings occur in April through June months, which is considered the proxy season. On slide 6, we show the distribution of voting items as organized by the 5 core subject areas addressed in LACERA's corporate governance and stewardship principles as outlined on the right side of the slide. Even as LACERA's proxy voting authority has expanded, voting on director elections account for the bulk, approximately 60% of all voting items as enumerated in the graph on the left. And while environmental and social proposals get the bulk of attention, they still account for less than 1% of all voting items as shown on the top of the graph. Moving on to slide 7, we break down the number of proposals by sponsor, such as management or shareholder. Generally, shareholder proposals account for a small fraction of total proposals and have remained constant as a proportion of LACERA's voting items. Voting support for management and shareholder proposals has remained consistent over the past 2 years as guided by LACERA's corporate governance and stewardship principles. Slide 8 further expands on management-sponsored proposals and breaks down into 3 key areas: director elections, advisory vote on executive compensation, also known as say on pay, and auditor ratification. As noted on the top chart, LACERA supported less than 2/3 of directors up for election and highlights the key reasons for votes against, including votes against key leadership for lack of credible track record of inclusion of directors with diverse attributes. The middle chart displays LACERA's support level for say on pay ballot items. LACERA's principles state that the executive compensation and incentives should align with the interests of the executives and investors. There should be a balance between incentivizing and rewarding executives for superior performance while encouraging risk mitigation and avoiding excessive risks that may be detrimental to the firm's long-term financial value. LACERA votes against say on pay proposals where that link is broken. Bottom of the slide provides brief examples of votes that LACERA cast this year on management-sponsored proposals. I'd like to highlight the ExxonMobil meeting where LACERA supported 4 dissident directors in a proxy contest, as the board was composed of several former CEOs that lacked the industry experience and skills to oversee a long-term business strategy addressing climate change and an energy transition. Slide 9 dives into Shell.
Oh, I have a question before you move on.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't see my hand. On the key influencing factors for votes against directors, are we doing that systematically? Is that with the help of either Glass Lewis or some kind of proxy voting service? How did we kind of take in all that information and make it consistent across the votes?
Both ISS and Glass Lewis provide research for us, and they're analyzing the board and determining where they're independent or not independent and where they're overboarded. And so we're taking that information and are applying our principles to it, and that determines our vote outcome.
But then I can assume then that the principles are being applied consistently, meaning that there isn't some place where we're voting one way and another place where we're voting another.
That is correct.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions before Scott moves on? Thanks. Keep going.
Okay, thank you. Slide 9 delves into shareholder sponsored proposals. The top chart highlights that governance-oriented proposals are the largest component, approximately 90% of shareholder proposals. LACERA's support for governance-related proposals was up slightly over 2020, even with a moderate increase in the number of items voted. Common governance topics are noted next to the bar chart and have remained fairly consistent in their appearance over the years. LACERA's support for environmental and social proposals has decreased, represented mostly by shareholder proposals outside the US, which are often overly prescriptive and restrictive in nature, and LACERA's principles are less likely to support. This is noted in the sidebar on the right side of the slide. The bottom of the slide provides several examples of shareholder proposals that LACERA supported during the season. Here I'll highlight the sample vote on the bottom right corner of the slide. LACERA supported several proposals, 3 of which received majority support, asking companies to report on their DEI efforts in the overall context of their human capital management strategy and corporate strategy. Moving on to slide 10, this slide addresses some of the bigger themes of management-sponsored proposals for the broader proxy season. In earlier slides, I commented on how these items were addressed in LACERA's proxy voting, but this slide summarizes the outcomes and trends once all votes were tallied across all investors. Generally, say-on-pay ballot items and directors continue to receive high levels of support from investors. Although there have been some high profiles examples of directors being targeted in vote no campaigns and proxy contests, such as at ExxonMobil, only 58 directors at 40 Russell 3000 companies failed to receive more than 50% support. Generally speaking, when and where directors fail to garner higher levels of investor support tends to be where there is an egregious instance of failed board oversight. The next slide summarizes themes identified among shareholder proposals, particularly with an environmental and social focus. Climate-related proposals are receiving higher ever support levels, including majority support at energy and other high emissions companies for more robust climate analysis and reporting, as well as reporting on how companies are directing dollars in lobbying efforts that are aligned with the Paris Agreement goals. Strikingly, proposals for large, widely held companies like Chevron to report and reduce Scope 3 emissions receive support from about 2/3 of investors, signaling a strong shift to investor focus on climate risks, even among some of the large fund complexes. Focus on human capital increased amid scrutiny of human rights risks and supply chains, workforce actions taken in light of COVID-19, and investor attention on diversity, equal employment opportunity, and workplace equity. Similarly, here we observe strong upswing in investor support for more transparency on workforce composition, such as disclosing EEO-1 reports. I'm going to hand it back to Scott to take on the next couple slides.
Great, thank you, Dale. And following Dale's comments on some of the market context, in slide 12, we wanted to present a quick snapshot on some developments regarding diversity on corporate boards in particular. As the committee is aware, LACERA's principles are universal. We expect boards to be comprised of highly qualified directors who bring the requisite skills to oversee corporate strategy and risk on our behalf as investors. And we expect companies to cast a wide net for that talent, inclusive of directors with diverse backgrounds, such as gender, race, and the LGBTQ community. We expect to see a credible track record of inclusion. And where we don't see inclusion, we may vote against certain directors, which last year prompted a vote against about 1% of director nominees in the stats that Dale mentioned. We are seeing an increased market focus on diversity, which is in line with our actions helping to prompt several advancements, as noted in this slide. For instance, women now represent about 1/4 of board seats in the US, up from 20% in 2019. And when board seats do open up, about half of new appointments are women, and also about half are people of color, with some overlap between those two demographics, of course. And last year, we saw some episodic disclosures of LGBTQ representation on boards, yet market-wide analysis and summary stats remain limited. Despite some advancements, we see inclusion is often limited to 1 or 2 directors of diverse gender or racial background, and have thrown out some statistics on that front for the committee's insight. We cite here that 2/3 of US firms, for example, appear to have 2 or fewer directors of color, and gender inclusion varies greatly by market, with only 1% of companies in France having fewer than 2 women, whereas boards with fewer than 2 women represent around half of companies in notable markets like Brazil, Hong Kong, Singapore, and a striking 95% of South Korean firms. So we think LACERA remains distinguished for scrutinizing board diversity in all markets. We want to be consistent in line with empirical evidence that diversity leads to outperformance. And we want to continue to do so in a credible, pragmatic way. This is both in line with our stewardship principles as well as fund-wide efforts to advance DEI as part of LACERA Tide, and we'll be reporting more fully on that next month. We anticipate that increased disclosure and data sources are enabling us to elevate our focus on board diversity going forward, including expecting more than one director of a diverse background, and more deeply scrutinizing what constitutes a credible track record of inclusion. So raising the bar by using that available data and disclosures as they're available by market may lead to increased director opposition in the near term in some markets. This is consistent with our approach of expecting robust director independence in all markets, for example, where we expect 2/3 of boards to be comprised of independent directors, regardless of the market. And we think it keeps LACERA at the vanguard of advocating board diversity in all markets through our proxy voting. So we'll continue to report to the committee on developments on this topic and our voting record as we go forward.
I have a question, Scott.
Sure.
This is great information. At this point, diversity appointments are pretty substantial. It can get better, it should be monitored, but is anyone beginning? We've seen academic research to support the idea that this improves results. Is anyone, now that we're seeing a pretty real shift occurring, tracking what's happening in sort of the real world as this improved dynamic plays out?
Mr. Bernstein, could you clarify
what I see is that we're monitoring what's happening, and a lot is happening, and more can happen, and it's good. But when there are statistics like 44% of new directors are women, 47% are people of color, that's a substantial number, and we've promoted this in part because we saw really good academic research that supports we get a better business result. We are being responsible to our fiduciary duty to maximize outcome by promoting this. And I'm just curious how the tracking is going to be going now that we're seeing more of this play out.
Sure, thank you for the question. I think we continue to see more empirical research being conducted. And some of that research, like McKinsey updates research every 2 years or so, highlights expanding outperformance on a market-wide basis. In terms of specifically tracking individual company performance based on board composition, I'm not familiar with specific studies on individual companies, for example. It's more market-wide.
And I'll be candid, I'm not sure what the best metric is for observing it. I'm just curious how this is a constantly expanding conversation. I'm just curious how the conversation here continues to expand.
It's a well-noted inquiry, and we're endeavoring to follow the research and developments as they've come forward. I think you're likely aware that NASDAQ has put forward and the SEC has approved rules that also require various efforts towards underrepresented populations on NASDAQ listed companies. California has new legislation as well. So there are a few different efforts coming from different angles. Malaysia, for example, even has introduced some, I believe, listing standards regarding gender inclusion in particular. So in different markets, there are different efforts. To Ms. Sanchez's earlier question, we are endeavoring to approach this in a universal manner, but using data and disclosures in a pragmatic and credible way across the 65 markets that Dale referenced that we're voting.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Great. With that, perhaps we can move on to slide 14. Which provides the committee with some quick updates on regulatory developments related to our proxy voting efforts. The gist of this slide is that on one hand, the SEC has indicated it's reviewing and might revise adopted rules or rules that were adopted over the last year that restricted eligibility of shareholders to file shareholder resolutions. and increased regulatory requirements on proxy-related research. We, the Council of Institutional Investors and others, were concerned that these rules may unnecessarily impede investors' access to timely proxy research, as well as the objectivity of that research, and preferred that the SEC focus on more systematic proxy rules, such as end-to-end vote confirmation, by which we can be assured that when and where we vote, our votes are counted and tabulated. We understand that the SEC might be moving in the very near term on revisions to some of these recent rules to ease some of those restrictions. On the other hand, the SEC might be moving forward on items we've long advocated, such as introducing a universal proxy card by which investors like us might select in a proxy contest like occurred at Exxon, nominees that we prefer from both the dissident and the management sponsor slate. In fact, the SEC has scheduled a meeting today at which they're expected to review and vote on a new universal proxy card provision. So we're pleased to see some positive movement on some long-held advocacy positions on this front. So I will turn it over to Dale to cover a quick date on just the operational aspects of our proxy voting.
Thanks, Scott. So on slide 16, we're providing an update on operational aspects of the proxy voting process, which may impact LACERA's ability to vote its shares. LACERA's approach to these items are discussed in the proxy voting section under stewardship strategies and LACERA's corporate governance and stewardship principles. We're trying to take our best efforts to vote in a manner consistent with our fiduciary duty and long-term value, recognizing that there are impediments that we're not always able to proceed with that voting through. So that concludes our comments, and we'd be happy to take any further questions on the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions from the committee or for any of the trustees who are on? Comments, questions? Thank you all for this update. And Scott, can we move on to 6B, update and review of corporate governance engagement initiatives? Oh, Scott and Dale, I didn't mean to cut you out, Dale.
It's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Mr. Bernstein. So report 6B highlights updates on LACERA's engagement and governance initiatives for the committee's review. And Kwok, if you don't mind sharing the deck for us to follow along, please. Great. So slide 3 briefly recaps our approach and is intended to level set the review for any newer trustees and participants in today's meeting. This follows the last presentation in the sense that in addition to voting proxies at portfolio companies, LACERA also endeavors to proactively advocate sound corporate governance practices that are in line with our approved corporate governance and stewardship principles through various engagement initiatives. On slide 3, we recap that to prioritize where we focus energy and resources, we developed and discussed 4 core areas of emphasis with the committee back in 2018, including on that upper left side, policy advocacy on investor rights, promoting best practices that are meaningfully linked to financial performance, such as board diversity, as we just discussed, enhancing the quality, availability, and reliability of ESG disclosures and data, and where we see the room and opportunity, elevate some thought leadership in the marketplace. We strive to do so in line with the 5 considerations noted on the bottom, including pursuing initiatives that might have a meaningful impact in the market and maintaining credibility with other investors in the topics and the items that we pursue. And of course, in line with the procedures approved by the committee and the board and the principles policy. So the rest of the deck gives a quick update on core initiatives. I'll start on slide 4 with the collaborative engagement on board diversity, where Dale can update the committee on year 3 of our collaborative engagement with other California funds.
Thank you, Scott. As articulated in LACERA's corporate governance and stewardship principles, corporate boards should be comprised of highly qualified directors with a diverse set of skills, backgrounds, and experiences relevant to the company's business strategy. a diverse and inclusive board, including but not limited to diverse gender, racial, and ethnic backgrounds, gender identities, sexual orientations, and disability status is better situated to constructively deliberate and prudently guide business strategy and investors' interests. LACERA has multiple avenues in which to move forward in promoting board diversity, such as proxy voting and corporate engagement. So last year, LACERA collaborated with other California funds, including CalPERS, CalSTRS, and San Francisco Employees Retirement System, to engage companies with an apparent lack of board diversity based on available public disclosures and to encourage a sharpened focus on board quality by casting a wide net for board candidates inclusive of diverse gender, racial, and LGBTQ backgrounds. So we sent letters to 74 companies and held discussions with corporate leaders and independent board directors to understand their process for board evaluations, skills assessments, and director recruitment. Through that engagement, 54 companies appointed 76 directors of diverse backgrounds. That takes the total over the past 3 years to 247 directors, including women and/or people of color, that have been added to 141 boards. In addition, numerous companies have revised governance policies and documents to affirm the commitment to diversity and to include diverse directors in interview slates. All 4 funds are collaborating again this fiscal year to expand the engagement to 57 more large and mid-cap companies with an apparent lack of racial diversity to understand their process for board evaluation, skills assessments, and director recruitment. On the next slide, we have some
I have a question before you leave that slide. Previously, you had further breakdowns as to how many, in terms of the people of color, how many were African American, Hispanic, Asian, etc. Do you have that available?
I can look that up.
I mean,
here.
obviously it's not on this slide, but I'm just wondering if you have it available to send to us later.
Yes, we can provide that information later.
Thank you.
Gail, are you also including, if they have it available, numbers of LGBT folks?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't see that on here. So they're not reporting it, or they're not, well, you're including the first bullet under update, but I don't see it underneath. So they're not appointing any?
Mr. Kelly, I can add in that, what we see in part the next slide, companies, in addition to appointments, are revising policies and incorporating into policies broader definitions of what constitutes diversity, inclusive of the LGBTQ community. In the last year for new appointments, we have not seen any new appointments of individuals who identify on a voluntary basis as LGBTQ. However, we did see some episodic disclosures, including one of the companies that we engaged broke down broader representations on an aggregate basis of board diversity, including LGBTQ representation, participation on the board. Another company that broke down gender categories inclusive of non-binary representation. So my observation at this point is that there's some movement, but not broad.
Thank you.
And then Scott just brought up the slide. So this is just some of the policy revisions that we noted in some of the documents with a broader definition of diversity, including the LGBTQ community, as Scott mentioned, and race and ethnicity and gender. So I'll hand it back to Scott.
Okay. So on slide 7, we'll move on to another one of our initiatives that's trying to encourage best practices. This updates the committee on an initiative we discussed in the fall, encouraging corporate governance practices related to DEI in the workplace of portfolio companies. We specifically contacted six companies, large multinational firms, that had formed a committee of the Business Roundtable on racial equity, both in society and their own companies. we focused our discussions on clarifying and encouraging clear governance policies and disclosures within their own workplace practices, such as board oversight of DEI objectives and performance indicators, transparency of workforce demographics like EEO-1 reports, meaningful pay incentives, such as ensuring that clawback policies are in place in the event that an executive violates anti-harassment policies or other anti-discrimination provisions, and companies can be in a position to take action, and risk assessments such as pay parity analyses. We have noted some observations in this slide, including a wide jump in the number of companies disclosing workplace demographic statistics, as well as a number of areas where companies are refining or expanding policies and disclosures at this point. For example, while companies are doing more pay parity assessments, we find that the scope of those pay parity assessments are often limited and not heavily described in disclosures. For example, they might conduct pay parity analyses in the US, but despite being multinational companies are not looking at other markets, or their pay parity might be limited to gender, despite the availability of EEO-1 data in the US operations. So we are encouraging further refinement of disclosures and policies in these practices. This also helped clarify where the market is at in leading practices that we're incorporating into our other governance work and engagements with companies, as well as our due diligence of asset managers on encouraging best practice on DEI. So I will move on to slide 8. Key among our efforts to improve ESG data availability and quality, comparability and usefulness has been our support for the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB. The committee might recall that we hosted SASB a couple of years ago when they were really just starting out. SASB's developed industry-driven ESG metrics in 77 industries. And as noted in this slide, as of this September, over half of the largest global firms now incorporate SASB standards into their corporate disclosures, representing a tremendous step forward in momentum, driven in part by investor coordination and interest and dialogue with companies of why we find SASB reporting useful. We also highlight for the committee that following market consultation in the last year, the International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFS, that kind of govern international accounting outside of the US, has announced the formation of a new global body to set ESG standards. They're calling the International Sustainability Standards Board, and that will consolidate and merge SASB by next summer. So this is a significant step in harmonizing global ESG reporting in a relatively short amount of time. And as in response, as that map in the lower right side highlights, a response to a proliferation of market-based regulatory measures to encourage clearer ESG reporting. Separately, the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the US is anticipated to announce proposed rules around climate disclosure specifically, and possibly other ESG metrics like human capital in the near future. So we've jammed a lot on this one slide, but it's been a core area of some advancements in line with our engagement work. I'll move on to slide 9, which provides an update on our efforts to work with Climate Action 100 to clarify investment risks on and opportunities on climate. And Dale can provide an update there.
Thanks, Scott. So LACERA's corporate governance and stewardship principles recognize that climate change presents potential financial, operational, and regulatory risk to companies in which LACERA invests and to the broader market. And LACERA addresses climate-related risks through several channels, including proxy voting, portfolio assessment, and company engagement. Through the Climate Action 100 Plus, LACERA is collaborating with other investors to encourage 167 of the most carbon-intensive companies to mitigate climate risks. These companies represent approximately 80% of global industrial emissions and about half of LACERA's public markets carbon footprint. So the engagements are focused on ensuring commitments and disclosure of short, medium, and long-term emissions reduction targets that are robust and aligned with the Paris Agreement to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees by 2050. Currently, the engagements are particularly focused on interim pathways, meaning the midterm targets for emissions reductions, capital allocation that supports the pathway to transition, executive pay and incentives aligned with those commitments, and disclosure of lobbying efforts that provide clarity into public policy support. The climate action will be releasing another benchmark report early next year. There is some anticipation that there could be a pickup in votes against directors at companies that are laggards, according to that benchmark report. And that's it for this section. Scott, back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Scott, I have a question going back 2 slides, but I had to find my information to ask it. So I just have a question about the merging of IFRS and SASB. My understanding was that SASB merged with IIRC. Is this the same merger? That was to create the Value Reporting Foundation. So I'm just confused as to all of the entities being created here.
Very, very fair point. And I'll try to address the question without adding more alphabet soup to the mix.
Well, I know there's more alphabets here, but these are the ones that I was focused on. So I'm just trying to track them all so that I know which set of letters refers to which groups.
Absolutely. So a year ago, 5 different ESG sustainability reporting organizations announced that they would collaborate going forward. That included—
Which of those 5? Yeah.
Whew, is this a test?
Sorry.
But among the 5 were SASB and the Integrated Reporting Initiative merging together into the Value Reporting Foundation, which I believe you're specifically referencing.
That's the one that I was asking about.
Correct. So that merger was officially consummated. So
VRF exists.
The VRF exists. So that is the legal entity overseeing the SASB standards board and the SASB standards. What the IFRS has announced is that they will form a new international sustainability standards board that will integrate the VRF, which includes the SASB standards. It will also integrate the climate standards disclosure board, which is a separate entity. That's correct.
CDSB, that's World Economic Forum.
That's correct. And as well as coordinate with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So that's TCFD.
TCFD, son of a
right.
bitch. Okay,
So the TCFD is not a formal standards body. It's a task force as developed by Michael Bloomberg and Mary Shapiro. So there aren't specific standards to integrate, but they've announced that they'll work with the TCFD as well. So that alphabet soup, the spirit is that it becomes more harmonized and consolidated, so that investors and companies have clear guidance of what's expected across the markets that we're investing in, regardless of jurisdiction.
Okay, so this new ISSB is going to combine CDSB, the task force, and then the new Value Reporting Foundation. All of those standards will become ISSB.
That it's correct with the possible distinction that the TCFD as a framework more than a standards board. I'm not clear exactly if that's merged or if it's just coordinated. Frankly, they've announced what was approved was the consolidation with a lot of these questions on specifics to be sorted out between now and June of next summer.
Okay.
Let me know if that helps clarify.
It does help. I was just super confused because I thought VRF was a done deal, which it is. It's just this is a new deal that's somehow incorporating VRF.
Correct.
Everybody wants to get a scoop on everyone else.
Yes, if you ask me to put that in alphabetical order, I'll get back to you.
No, I won't. I got it. TCFD was the only one that was new to me. I mean, because I didn't consider them a board as well, like an actual framework. Thank you.
Great, great. Hopefully this is a step towards greater cohesion and clarity, but we know that it'll still be some evolution in the coming years. So, great. Shall we move on to slide 10, I think? Slide 10 is highlights various financial market and governance topics that LACERA has actively commented on and advocated among regulators and legislators, including investor rights, such as proxy voting on universal proxy cards that we discussed earlier, as well as weighted voting at companies with multi-class share structures, clear disclosures of fees in private markets with ILPA, which the SEC Chair Gensler announced earlier this month at ILPA Summit, that he's announced that he's asked SEC staff to bring forward proposed market rules for consideration. And a third core area of consistency, clarity, comparability, and ESG disclosures, as we also just discussed. When LACERA joins joint investor statements with associations like CII or ILPA, or when we submit formal comments, we do so in accordance with the procedures defined in LACERA's corporate governance and stewardship principles. And on slide 11, if we can move forward, we note that the committee undertook an exercise in 2017 to refine and update procedures governing when and how we participate in joint letters and submit comments to regulatory agencies like the SEC. Part of the aim then was to facilitate LACERA being more active and support policy advocacy in the associations we've formally endorsed, including being able to act on matters that might occur between board meetings. In light of last month's BOI offsite and the interest indicated there that we continue our governance engagement initiatives, possibly elevating further, we've incorporated a slide here to note that LACERA also has a separate legislative policy that guides how LACERA engages policymakers on fund and benefit administration, among other matters. We highlight and know that trustees have asked in the past, should we visit these two policies and make sure that they're working in the same direction? We consider that the BOI's corporate governance and stewardship principles policy has provided effective guidance to facilitate our policy engagement on financial market and governance matters. And we've been in discussion with our colleagues in the legal office to add clarifying language for trustee consideration to the legislative policy that would affirm that the corporate governance principles that this committee oversees are the primary procedural guidance on governance matters. Language would also be proposed that would state that to the extent that there's lack of clarity on procedures, we would default to a conservative interpretation and use the legislative policy. So at this point, we're not suggesting any specific language for trustee consideration, but we'll work with the legal office to bring forward language to the legislative policy that would affirm that the governance policy that we've been working underneath this committee remains the primary guiding point. And moving on to slide 13, typically in the fall committee meeting, we review LACERA's annual assessment to the PRI. LACERA affiliated to Principles of Responsible Investment, affiliated with the United Nations in 2008, I believe. And in recent years, we've built up and maintained an A+ rating in our PRI assessment for overall strategy on ESG integration. This year, the PRI is postponing the release of their annual assessment results as they undergo some revisions to a new assessment methodology. But despite that, we want to highlight that following BOI feedback at the offsite last month, we're going to continue to promote cohesion and consistency in our ESG assessments of each and every mandate across the total fund and across all asset classes. We're prioritizing further building out a total fund view of climate risks and opportunities, where data right now is predominantly available in public markets, but we think that we can build out some private market data as well to get a total fund view. And then we're focusing on several projects in real assets and real estate in particular, including concluding a 2-year trial affiliation with a global real estate sustainability benchmark That's GRESB for anybody following acronyms this morning. That helps benchmark the ESG performance of our real estate portfolio, as well as facilitate some data analytics that help inform total fund analytics. So as these projects come forward, we'll be checking back in with the committee and the board on progress and your input. Lastly, on slide 14, we do aim to make our stewardship work transparent for all audiences, for trustees, for members, for stakeholders, for other interested parties. If we move to slide 15, we've highlighted two of those efforts. One of the attachments in today's report is an updated version of our 2021 Corporate Governance and Stewardship Update. This summarizes the proxy voting results that we just reviewed, includes some updates on the engagement and ESG integration work. If anybody wants to know LACERA's approach, it's in that report. It also follows the TCFD framework describing our approach to identifying and mitigating climate risks and opportunities. So that's on the website. We give a shout out to our colleagues in communications for their assistance in that report. Our correspondence with the SEC and other letters are also on the website in real time. So not only do we provide it to the BOI, of course, but we're also putting that on the website. And we'll continue to look for opportunities through white papers and other publications to try to be as clear and useful on being transparent of our efforts. Slide 16 is a recap of some of the items we just discussed. I think with that, I will pause and welcome any comments or questions from the committee or other trustees.
Can you please put the letters in alphabetical order? I'm just kidding.
Noted.
Any other feedback, questions, comments? Great. I think that's everything. I think it's been well received. Thank you very much, Scott and Dave, and of course, Kwok, for driving the presentation. So I think we're done with that, Scott.
I have one last question, actually, Scott. With regard to sort of all of the alphabet soup we've discussed and GRI, which is the kind of most adopted global standard, how do those play in terms of choosing SASB versus GRI as the kind of framework we embrace as an organization? Or does it matter? Do they do both? Do companies do both?
Sure. So our principles encourage companies to identify, disclose ESG factors that can impact value on the downside or the upside, and with a recognition that material ESG factors could vary by industry. So prominent among that approach has been SASB's materiality-driven reporting framework that we particularly coordinated with. GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative based out of the Netherlands, also encourages sustainability reporting. It is a broader framework with broader factors of across all industries, including both ESG integration and broader impact. So they are not mutually exclusive. The points of emphasis are somewhat distinct. And our focus with the board's affiliation with SASB in recent years has been primarily on encouraging the materiality disclosures.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that wraps that up. Let us move on to item 7, Carol, items for staff review.
We do not have any.
Thank you very much.
I asked for a further breakdown of the diversity data.
Got that, Carol?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Can you call the roll for good of the order, please?
Yes. Ms. Sanchez,
Thank you for all the information. Appreciate it.
Mr. Santos?
Yeah, I'd like to compliment Mr. Dreisel and Mr. Johnson for the tremendous work you have done over the years. This is great information. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Mr. Green?
I'll just echo Mr. Santos's comments. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Scott. Great information.
Mr. Jones?
Ditto, outstanding job. This was as a relatively new person. It was great to get the summary, the level of information about all the other kind of policy considerations, and then how you all been monitoring and making progress against those things. So thank you very much.
Mr. Kelly?
Very impressive. We've come a long way when you look back over the last several years. So thank you.
And Chair Bernstein?
Slightly longer comment. I just want to acknowledge that I have had the opportunity to chair this committee for 3 years. This is our final meeting of the year. I'm coming up on a gap year, so it seems pretty likely I won't be doing it next year. So I want to thank Mr. Green and Mr. Kehoe and Mr. Knox, who all afforded me this opportunity. I want to thank all the trustees who I've done this with, but I particularly want to thank staff, John, Scott, everyone who works on this team. And to echo what my colleagues have said, in 3 years, we've really made amazing progress. And corporate governance in particular calls for a certain amount of discontent. So there's always progress to be made. And to the degree that that discontent drives it, that's a good and healthy thing. But I want to take a moment to acknowledge that in just this 3-year window, this organization and this movement in investment has come a long way. And our team has been a really great part of that. So it's been a pleasure to get to do this. And that is it, Carol?
That is it. And thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you, Mr. Bernstein.
Thank you very much. Just a quick housekeeping. At 9 o'clock, we will have a hopefully very short board of retirement meeting, but on the Zoom platform, which I will be chairing, and then I will turn it over to Mr. Kelly to chair the BOI meeting. So I will entertain a move for adjournment, and then again at 9 o'clock, the BOR will come into session. I will need a motion for adjournment, please.
So moved.
Without objection, we are adjourned.
Mr. Bernstein, does that mean that for those of us who are not on the BOR, is there a prescribed